Okay, so now we are on the urinary system. The function of the urinary system is to filter the blood and rid the body of liquid waste. Some of the main organs of the urinary system, the kidneys, and the kidneys are relatively small. They're like about the size of a bar of soap. We have a ureter that goes from the kidney to the bladder, so it's transporting material, the filtrate from the kidneys to storage in the bladder. And the bladder actually has a really interesting transitional epithelium that makes the bladder stretchy so that it can accommodate the filtrate that it's trying to store. And then finally, from the bladder outside the body is the urethra. The ureters, there's two ureters, from the kidneys to the bladder, the urethra from the bladder outside the body. We had talked about water before and how important water is. It happens to be 60% of our body mass, so most of our body is made of water. We talked about the fact that it was essential for reactions like hydrolysis. It helps to dissolve minerals, deliver nutrients because it's a main component of our blood, the plasma of our blood, regulate body temperature. It can absorb a lot of heat, and you lose a lot of heat when you evaporate water off the surface of your skin. Helps to lubricate joints, moisten tissues like the surfactant that we mentioned in our lungs, keeps the lungs from sticking, the alveoli in our lungs from sticking together, and to help to flush out waste. Medical professionals associated with the urinary system. Urologist is going to diagnose or treat issues with the urinary system. Nephrologist is going to specialize in issues with the kidneys. Medical technologist, chemical lab scientists, medical lab scientists, they're all kind of the same thing. But basically, they're doing the diagnostic testing of blood and bodily fluids. When we digest our macromolecules, these are the waste products that we end up with. So carbohydrates, we said CHO. And so we'll end up with carbon dioxide and water whenever we digest those. Lipids was also CHO, so carbon dioxide and water. Proteins, CHON, so we're adding that nitrogen on there, which is actually very important. Nitrogen ends up creating ammonia in our body, which is bad. Nucleic acid, CHONP, so nitrogen and the phosphate. So we end up with carbon dioxide, water, nitrogen, and phosphate as the waste products. So hopefully you recognize this as an amino acid as one of the monomers for a protein. We have our central carbon, hydrogen, we have our variable group, the COOH, and the NH2. When this is digested, when this is broken down, the COOH, the carboxyl group, ends up creating carbon dioxide and water, but the amine group ends up creating ammonia. Ammonia is very toxic to us, and we need to process it and get it out of our body as soon as possible. The liver is what converts ammonia to urea, and that's removed from our body in urine. Okay, so I've got a picture of a kidney here, and I laid this on top so that we can see the three divisions, the three parts of the kidney. This part right here is the cortex, so you can see the cortex on the colored picture. The middle, medulla of the kidney. So the medulla of the kidney is this area right here in the middle. And the pelvis. So here's the pelvis of our kidney. So the pelvis, oops, I didn't have that. Okay, so cortex right here, the outer layer. We have the renal artery and the renal vein. So the renal artery, it has the waste in that blood, and so it's bringing the blood from the heart to the kidney to be processed. So the blood's coming in the renal artery. Renal vein, after the blood has been processed, it returns the clean blood to the heart. Within the medulla, we have the medullary pyramids. They have these kind of triangle shapes here. So the medullary pyramid, its job is to transport urine from where it's formed to the calyx. So as urine is formed, it transports that urine to the calyx. The calyx is the tan part of the picture right here inside this pelvis. The calyx collects and funnels the urine out of the kidney. So it's all collected and funneled out of the kidney, and so this is eventually going to create the ureter that goes down to the bladder. The capsule is this very outer layer. It's going to support and protect the kidney. And so the basic steps through the kidney, the blood from the renal artery runs through the nephrons, which we'll look at in a moment, runs through the nephrons to form the urine, to filter it and form the urine. The urine is collected in the calyx and the pelvis, and the ureter transports the urine out of the kidney. All right, so feedback loop for water. Negative feedback loop, and once again, this is simplified. We're just putting a few components on here. So let's say we end up with a low blood pressure or low water volume. That is going to be picked up by sensors, and those sensors are going to be triggering the hypothalamus and triggering renin to be released into the kidney. The hypothalamus, hypothalamus, so hunger and thirst, the hypothalamus is going to release ADH, and it's going to increase your thirst. So increasing the thirst, you're taking in more water, releasing ADH is going to affect the kidney. Renin is released into the kidney. When that compound is released into the kidney, it turns angiotensinogen into angiotensin. Angiotensin then is a molecule that's going to affect your blood vessels, and it's going to affect your adrenal gland to produce aldosterone. There we go. That looks better. So angiotensin, renin's released into the kidney. Renin converts angiotensinogen into angiotensin. Angiotensin affects the blood vessels and affects the adrenal gland. So it's going to cause the blood vessels to constrict. That leads back to raising our blood pressure. The adrenal cortex is then going to release aldosterone, which affects the kidney. It's going to tell the kidney, to tell the nephron to reabsorb more water and to reabsorb sodium chloride, which is salt. So reabsorbing more water and hanging on to more sodium chloride, well, sodium chloride attracts water. Water potential is going to move from areas of higher water concentration to where there's more solute. So by holding on to more salt, that actually helps us to bring in and to hang on to even more water. That's going to raise the blood pressure and the water level. Then if our blood pressure gets too high or our water volume is too high, that's going to stimulate the hypothalamus and tell the hypothalamus we don't need to induce feelings of thirst. We don't need to release ADH. So when there's not more of that release, the kidneys are not subjected to increased ADH and aldosterone. So the kidneys are not subjected to increased amounts of ADH and aldosterone. So the nephron's going to work normally to filter out the excess water and sodium chloride. All right. Functional unit of the kidney is the nephron. Within the kidney, within the nephron, we have secretion and reabsorption. Secretion is when material moves from the blood to the filtrate. So it gets filtered out of the blood and moves into the filtrate. The filtrate is basically the waste product, the urine that's produced. Then reabsorption. Reabsorption is when material moves from the filtrate back into the blood. So things like water and glucose, we don't want them out in the urine. We're going to reabsorb them back into the blood from the filtrate. All right, so on this little diagram right here, this represents a nephron. And this part of the nephron is going to be located in the cortex of the kidney. This part of the nephron is going to be in the medulla, and then the pelvis is going to be down below. But cortex and medulla, that's the important parts where these things are located. All right, so number 1, this is Bowman's capsule, and this is where filtration is going to take place. So blood is moving in from the renal artery. The network of capillaries are called the glomerulus, and this is filtration that's happening, and then anything that's filtered, the filtrate moves into this tubule and then is going to be processed through the rest of the nephron. So the orange arrows show the path of the filtrate, the movement of the filtrate. All right, number 3. 3 is right here. And so I have the purple represents water reabsorption, and the green represents glucose reabsorption. So reabsorption, remember, means going from the filtrate back into the blood vessels. So these smaller little tubes, those represent blood vessels. The larger tube is where the filtrate is moving through. That's our nephron tubule. So number 3, we have water and solutes like sodium chloride move out of the tubule into the paratubule capillaries. So it's being reabsorbed into these capillaries, into the blood vessels. The X represents the proximal tubule, proximal, closer to point of attachment. It's where glucose is being reabsorbed back into the blood, back into that capillary. Number 4 is right here, descending loop of Henle. This is the loop of Henle. We have a descending loop of Henle. We have water reabsorption that's going to occur. So water through here is going to move back into these little capillaries. Number 5, ascending loop of Henle. We have water and sodium chloride. We have solute reabsorption that's happening. So as this filtrate's moving through here, it's water and sodium chloride is being reabsorbed back into those capillaries. Okay. Number 6, distal tubule is this area right here. We have reabsorption and secretion of water. Ammonia is going to be secreted into the filtrate. Any water that we still need is going to be reabsorbed. Sodium chloride and solutes are going to move out of the tubule into this surrounding tissue. Because that sodium chloride is moving into that surrounding tissue, it changes the water potential. It makes the tissue concentration of salt increase. And then because all of the salt concentration is increased over here, water is going to leave the loop of Henle. So aldosterone, ADH is going to work on certain parts of this, and if it doesn't work on this to pull more water or more salt out, then the water and salt's going to stay in the filtrate. But if it does pull more salt out, then that's going to pull more water out. And number 7 is our collecting duct. So we do have secretion reabsorption that can happen here as well, mostly of water. The permeability of this the membrane of that tubule is changed. And if it becomes more permeable, it's going to increase secretion. If it becomes less permeable, it's going to decrease secretion. All right, and I'm going to tape that right on top of this so that I can see all the notes that go along with it. At the bottom, I mentioned again those hormones, ADH, released by the pituitary gland. It's going to increase how much water we retain. It's going to increase water absorbed in the nephron. And then aldosterone, that's released by the pituitary gland as well. Retention of sodium ions, which increase water retention. Okay, whoops. I just realized that I had double pituitary gland. I had to go back and check to make sure I wasn't losing my line. But aldosterone is released by the adrenal gland. ADH is released by the pituitary. So aldosterone actually, it acts on the nephron to hold on to more sodium ions, but because there's more solute, then the water is going to follow the solute, and so that's going to increase water retention when aldosterone holds on to more sodium ions. So I've got this turned sideways. So I've got my notebook turned sideways here so I can fit all this in there because this is the path through our urinary system. So we're starting with the renal artery. It's dropping off that blood to be filtered, and it's going to be filtered by the network, the web of capillaries, and the web of capillaries called the glomerulus that's in the Bowman's capsule. So the tubules that are going to pick up all the filtrate, those are the renal tubules, and they're going to go through the calyx. They're going to bring all the urine together, bring the filtrate together at the calyx. That's going to run through the renal pelvis. Oh, well, it would be helpful if you could see. The ureter is going to take it from the kidneys to the bladder. The urethra takes it from the bladder to outside the body. All right, so renal artery, glomerulus of the Bowman's capsule, runs through those bigger tubules, all of those tubules. The last one is the collecting tubule. That leads to the calyx, where it's all the filtrate is sort of funneled together, which is within the renal pelvis, leaving the kidney through the ureter to go to the bladder. Urethra takes it from the bladder outside the body. All right, you are going to do a dissection and you're going to do a urinalysis. For the urinalysis, so a urinalysis, this is the function of it. Abnormalities in a urinalysis can indicate congestive heart failure, diabetes, hypertension, physical damage or injury, kidney stones, and a whole lot of other stuff. But that's just a general idea. You are going to do tests that include macroscopic analysis, and macroscopic analysis involves the color and the clarity of the urine. You are going to do a chemical analysis, and the chemical analysis is going to analyze the pH, the specific gravity, whether or not there's ketones, whether or not there's protein or albumin present, whether or not there's glucose present, and if there are phenylketones present. Specific gravity. Oops. So you'll find out that specific gravity should basically be 1 because pure water doesn't have anything in it. But the more stuff there is in a liquid, the higher the specific gravity. So high values, if you have a specific gravity that has a high value, that means there's a whole bunch of stuff in the urine. Solid particles, cells like white blood cells, red blood cells, proteins, stuff like that. So specific gravity can tell you if there's a whole bunch of junk in there. And then finally, microscopic analysis. This involves looking for casts, cells, and crystals. So when you're ready for the urinalysis, you're going to have this stuff ready to go. The background information for the urinalysis will have what you're looking for, what normal values are, what high and low values are. So you'll need to take some brief notes so that you know when you go to actually do the urinalysis what your results mean.